Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. Welcome back, my friends. How's your September? I feel like our 1 month off absolutely flew by. There was some much needed catch-up time over here on my side of the microphone, that's for sure. I hope you enjoyed the replays of our four most popular episodes from this last and first year of the podcast. And of course, I'm totally curious, which episode has been your favorite? And also, I'm realizing I'm asking all of these questions and you can't respond because that's not how podcasts work. So, I would love it if you did actually respond over on Instagram. Tag me at The Maker's Playbook in a story or a post of your favorite episode from our first year, and let's celebrate together, rather than all of this one-sided talking that I'm doing right now, awkwardly. All right, honestly though, as you all know, trying to make sure the IG algorithm actually shows you what you want is tricky. So if you want to be sure to never miss an episode here on the podcast, the best thing to do is sign up for our email list, which is at www.makers-playbook.com/newsletter. At an absolute most, I send an email once a week, and it's either about a podcast episode or free photography tips. That's it. So hopefully that's helpful. And for those of you that have missed anything over the course of this season break, then we will be able to stay in touch that way. All right, so I digress. Enough housekeeping. We are back. It is officially season 2. We have so many new episodes in store for you again. And let me tell you, as amazing as season 1 was, I'm pretty freaking excited about season 2. So I'm going to stop talking all by myself now, and today we are going to kick off season 2 of the Maker's Playbook with the one and only Sunshine Cobb. Hey Sunshine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Thank you for making the time. I love how, just something like Instagram has opened up so many avenues, I feel like, which is weird since I try to spend less time on it.
It's kind of amazing. I think it gives you so much more direct feedback or direct contact with people. I mean, sometimes people don't answer, but still, I feel like you can reach out, and it's a very low risk way to kind of try to connect with folks. So I think it's great.
And at least from my experience so far over the last 6 months, 7 months of the podcast, it really goes to show just how open the clay community is. In the wedding industry, if I would have started a podcast and started reaching out to people, they would have been like, who are you? I'm busy, so sorry.
Yeah, well, it is. Other industries, I think, can be, it's funny. I think ceramics is open, but also I think there's this funny line with that where we've been taught that we have to be open when it's also okay to say no. It's also okay to say no. I think, and that's the thing is but there are other industries. I have a friend that makes shoes, and she's like, yeah, people hoard their information. They're just like, no, I'm not sharing any of that. So I think there is a good balance to find in ceramics, but I think there's room for conversations. That's really important. But I do sometimes counsel people on you have the right to say no. If someone asks something that you don't want to share, you have the right to say no.
That is a very good point, because a friend of mine just went through this. She's doing a lot of glaze research, and she shares a lot of other things, but she decided okay, this is going to be one line that I have. I have spent months and a lot of money trying to pair clay with glazes, and that's going to be the thing. And I think that it's good to know where those boundaries are of I am an open book about XYZ, but you know what? We're not going to you can go to the store.
I think it can be this funny thing with ceramics where novice folks coming into the industry, sometimes they don't quite understand the level with which they think, oh, it takes you 5 minutes to make a mug. You're like, no, it took me 20 years to figure out how to do this thing. And glazing is a thing that it's very proprietary. It's people work really hard. They invest a lot of energy. And in the beginning, you don't understand how much energy actually, and how much failure, how much just blood, sweat, and tears goes into that whole process. And so it's okay to set some boundaries.
Well, and I forget who it was, and I'm going to need to look up the conversation I had on Instagram. that somebody was explaining in some ways also that you're not actually doing anyone any favors if you are helping them skip so many steps because of the learning process around. It was someone who uses a lot of stencils, but she found a particular material that she draws her own and makes her own and whatnot. And it was like, the way my craft and my style and my skills changed because I tested out all these materials. You need to go to the store and do the same thing. Decide if you like wax versus latex versus, whatever, because it'll inform your look.
Well, yeah, and I think that was, my experience in grad school. I went to grad school at Utah State with John Neely and Dan Murphy. And I realized quickly, because I felt like when I showed up at grad school, I was ill-informed. Like I didn't really have a lot of ceramics background compared to other students there. Like they had glaze calc, they had all these other classes, and I had beginning and advanced ceramics. That basically is what I had. And so I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do, but there was this pressure, or I felt a pressure that don't go to your instructors with stupid questions. Like you don't want to be like, oh, you need to read a book. But that was sort of their response, So it behooves you to do research to then be able to problem solve in a much more specific way. Because, like I always tell people, it's like, I think some folks think everybody knows the whole pie of ceramics. But no, I know my little sliver, not even a whole piece, but my little sliver that I have focused time and energy to understand. But it's a huge, huge field with so many different applications and solutions to work on. So
this is the thing that is constantly stunning me in talking with people who are making a living from this field in particular, coming out of photography. I did a little bit of painting back in the day and things like that. That ceramics, to me, the difference in this medium compared to all the rest is the sheer breadth of skills that you have to have just to get a finished piece. Now, granted, of course, people can choose the varying levels of like, are you making your own clay? Are you making your own glazes? Are you, there's all these things. But if you go deep on all of them, you need to be a chemist. You need to be an engineer. You need to be like...
It's so much. I think that, and that's what's interesting because we have all levels of folks. Because you could think about just your corner paint a pot place. Like there's also that level of people's interaction with what they understand ceramics to be, or being a ceramic artist or maker or whatever. So it is a bizarre field that way. Because people ask me questions like, I have no idea. You're just going to have to dive in and figure that out because your guess is as good as mine. So, that's because that's the thing. It's like we can't, it's like you specialize. And I think that's part of learning any craft is you start to hone what you enjoy, what you like, what your goals are with that. You kind of dive into that in these different ways. And in the beginning, you're in the big pool, but then you kind of virgin off to the tinier pools. So.
Well, speaking of specializing, before we talk for another 10 minutes.
There we go. Okay.
For people who have never heard of you, how would you introduce yourself?
My name is Sunshine Cobb. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I typically don't introduce myself to people. But I am Sunshine Cobb. I'm a working ceramic artist and educator. These days, I'm obsessed with plants. I've got 3 cats, and I live in Helena, Montana, and I'm a studio artist. But, that's what I do for a living. So that's pretty much what I would say.
Fabulous. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from my purview, your specialty for sure is on the hand building side of things as well.
Yeah,
right?
It's so funny because I am known as a hand builder. I've written a book about hand building, so I think there is cause to believe that. But
you did it to yourself.
I know. So I do, but what's funny is half of my work is thrown, half is hand built. So I do both. Okay. It's just I see both hand building and wheel throwing as different tools that I use to do what I do. But I do a lot of hand coil building is kind of my specialty as far as the way that I make most stuff. But I still do a lot of throwing. I started out as a thrower. Okay. So so that's kind of what I do.
Spoiler alert to the book. It's not.
I know, exactly. Spoiler alert. No, I know. It's a funny thing because I'm actually working on a new book that's also about hand building. So there is, what I love about hand building is I think it's really versatile. And for me, I'm looking back in time, like, okay, as a young person, there's so much romance around throwing. Like, you just want to throw, and you have like this kind of,
What do you mean? I didn't marry a potter. What are you talking about? I don't know why.
But there's this funny thing. And so at some point for me, it was like, I didn't want everything to be round anymore. I was like, okay, I got to figure out something else out. This round is a little bit boring. So for me, it started in grad school to sort of veer towards the hand building investigation. And what's funny is, like, I jumped into teaching a class, like my third day at Utah State, like I was there for 3 days, and I was teaching a beginning ceramics class that was half the semester was hand building, half was throwing, and I'd never taught either of those classes. Oh shit! Sorry. Anyways, yeah. So I kind of learned along with the students in that. It really sent me down this path of like really just having fun and exploring non-round things mostly. So, I mean, as simple as that sounds, right. It's really, sometimes you're like, I want to make boxes, or I want to do this or whatever, so.
And then you're like, nothing can be straight. This is why round is good.
I know, exactly. So.
Well, I'm fascinated to know also, from the outside looking in, it's such a clear path that I'm fascinated by, because mine is so windy that So it sounds like went to undergrad for arts, grad school, and now you're a studio potter, and this is like everyone. What a clear.
I know.
How did you do it? How did you know?
Well, okay, so I'm almost 50. I turn 50 next year. I'm 49. I did lots of different stuff in my undergrad. My mom's here visiting, and it's funny because she's like looking around my house and talking. She's like, well, when you wanted to be a travel agent, and then when you wanted to do this, and like I had all these crazy things that I wanted to do. I was a massage therapist for a while. I was in movie production for a while. I kind of very much treated my 20s and my education like I tried a lot of things on, and some stuff fit, other stuff didn't. And what's funny about coming into Clay was I was working as a nanny, and I was trying to finish up my undergrad, doing junior college, and then transferring to 4-year. And basically had always wanted to take a wheel throwing class since I was a little kid. I had never had the opportunity. And so when I was working as a nanny, I was in the University of Davis, Davis, California. And so I was able to actually work the front desk at this craft center and take a class in exchange. And so I started wheel throwing, and I did that. And it ended up being really wonderful, and kind of like this, it was not something I thought I would do for a living, but it was a hobby, and I loved it. And so when I eventually went to 4-year university, then they had ceramics classes. I was like, I would always get up for ceramics class. I wouldn't get up for statistics or anything else, right? It just didn't happen. And then it was like, I saw, my professors, they're doing this for a living. Maybe I can do something like this. And so the doors kept opening, and I kept following that path. And I never had a clear vision of like, I'm going to be, I always envy those people that kind of knew what they wanted to do. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And so
I'm always amazed and confused by those people, to be honest.
I was like, how do you know? How? Do you come to some point in your life where then you go, it's all been a mistake? Maybe, that's
I mean, I think we're avoiding midlife crises. So I think
it's true. We're having them younger.
Right. Exactly.
I know.
Oh, man. But we're having adventures also.
There we go. Exactly. I know. Oh.
I think you make a great point, though, because it seems the through line is, at least from my own experience as well, is once you actually see someone doing something, realizing, oh, this is a possibility because this person is doing that. And so how now, as far as how life actually functions, you mentioned both obviously being a practicing studio potter and also education. Is that within, the book you've written and things like that, or is that also within more formal education?
I say educator because I do, in the past, I've done lots of workshops, and I've transitioned to doing online workshops, like Zoom type workshops. And I think I always thought I was going to be a teacher in some way, like that was going to be a part of my experience, because it seemed like the only real way I was going to make a living. But then when I came out of grad school, it was kind of like the economic crisis, and there were no jobs, and it was just no feasible way to do that. And so I think from there being no feasible, or there being no jobs available, I kind of was like, okay, well, I just spent all this money and time to try to figure out how to be a potter, so I may as well try to invest in that as a business. And so I was able to do residencies and such that. I'm business minded. I grew up with entrepreneurial parents. We owned our own small business. And so that came a little bit more naturally to me to think about it in that terms. But what I have learned as being an artist, and maybe you know this too from doing weddings, being any kind of creative that is making a living, you diversify your income streams. You figure out where money needs to come from all places to you to make it work. They just have to come from everywhere. So that's the thing. It's the book is not something I set out to write a book. I never thought I would write a book, but it presented as an opportunity. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. So I think that's what's interesting is that my income streams come from pots, come from teaching, come from selling tools, come from selling books. All of that kind of stuff is kind of how I make it all work. So,
and that right there is part of the driver for me of having started this podcast in the first place, because as I was getting into it, having the decade of experience owning a business and looking at people selling online going, so how do these numbers connect? Because I know how hard it is to make a living as a photographer, and my overhead is nothing compared to a pottery studio. Even if that studio's in your house, just as far as equipment and replenishing and shipping alone.
Yeah, all that stuff, right? Yeah.
I literally can send an online gallery. There is no shipping.
I know. Oh, I know.
And so I was looking around and going, okay, you could see the obvious, and this is the case in the wedding and photography world as well, where you have the spousal or partner income or what have you. And then, of course, you could put two and two together as far as the side hustle and working full time. But then I also saw other people and trying to figure out where that gap was between what was presented on Instagram and on the internet versus real life of how does this actually work? And dear God, I hope in a way that is sustainable and reliable, and in a way that you can do it throughout your life and not just, okay, I'm going to eat ramen every night because I'm in my 20s and I can do that and it's cool. Yeah. As opposed to 30s, 40s, 50s, where it's okay, I need to think about a retirement fund, and I need to think about healthcare, and I need to think about...
Yeah, it's one of those things that it makes me crazy, because I think about... I wish I understood when I was younger how important some of that stuff was. I just didn't understand. I didn't... And kind of you're fed that dream of follow your dream. You can do anything. And you're just that's actual bullshit. It's just not true, And so it's hard to so I think it's interesting because I make my life work. I've made my life work for the past, so I graduated graduate school 2010 is when I graduated. So in theory, I would consider that my professional ceramics career. It's only 11 years old. That's the thing. It's I think it's priorities. It's what do you want out of life? And do you want someone else telling you what to do all the time? Is that, do you want to teach students that could give a shit about what you have to share with them? What is it that you want? How do you want to spend your time? And I think I have been, I would say, ornery or stubborn about the idea that I have one life and I want to spend it doing what I want to do. And if that means that at some point I have to make a choice to just step in front of a bus because I don't have a good retirement fund, then that's fucking going to be it. That's kind of how I feel. Because I don't want to waste all that time that I have worrying about money or working. It's just not something that I just to me, that's the balance of it. Because at this point in my life too, it's funny to, when I meet people, they've worked their whole life and all they're doing is waiting to retire and die. And I was I still want to have adventures. So I will figure out how to make my life work. And I live somewhat minimally. I just don't have a ton of stuff. I mean, I just don't, I don't have the things that trying to figure out how to buy a house. It's very difficult as a single person and an independently employed person. It's like nearly impossible. But it's also like, well, maybe that just isn't that important. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not quite sure. I wish I could say I had it all figured out and it presents this better picture. But it's even those folks, like you talk about, like it's Instagram reality versus actual reality. Even with friends that I'm like, oh, wow, I guess they bought a house. That's amazing. And then, you know, when you scrape away, you're like, oh, their parents helped them buy a house. Like, that's that thing. It's like there's all this other kind of generational wealth is what we call that now, right? Like there's all these other things that it's very difficult. And the thing is, like, the government doesn't make it any easier to make for a self-employed person. It's just absurd. They make things so difficult. So I wish I had some clear answer for you, but I don't. I think it's like combination of I figured out what I loved and I wanted to keep, and I figured out how to make a living, and learned how to, I say make a living. I learned how to support myself, and like it's taken a long time to generate regular income and do all this stuff and learn how to diversify all these revenue streams and figure that out, and to be able to make that work for me. I've had students or like mentees or people and ask me these questions. And I was like, it's hard to do. And that idea of like, you have to put yourself in so many kind of uncomfortable spaces. You have to ask for things. You have to like hustle you just have to. And that's the thing. It's like, I think sometimes folks get kind of, I don't know. It's just interesting. I wonder about it because I have some younger folks that are coming out of grad school now. And I told them before they went into grad school, I was like, you need to, like, there's not going to be a teaching job for you. There's not going to be this thing. And so now they're out and I was like, okay, what did I say? I said there was not, I kind of am doing that mom thing where I was like, what's the plan now? Right. And that's the thing. It's like, okay, it's time to hustle. This is, if you want to make this work now, this is what you do. I know you sent me some questions and I am like, I'm just rambling on now. So
no, we don't. They are my backup when I get stuck, and I've clearly never had a problem talking. And so it's never really come to that, but it's like, just in case, so we all feel safe, we have these.
Exactly.
But that's been my fascination as well, is I can see the through line of, when people go to undergrad or grad school or they get an MFA, and then the apprenticeships and things like that. But also, when I looked at that, thinking kind of from my perspective at 34, like the ship has kind of sailed to me in a way, in terms of like the percentage of people who have the ability to basically take a year off. And like, maybe they're breaking even, maybe there's a grant or it's a paid apprenticeship or whatever it is, where like, okay, your basic needs are taken care of and that's fine. I did like a volunteer year like that right out of undergrad, which is part of how I got introduced to clay in the first place, but that's a different story for another time. But like, I can see where there's times in life where you could take time to do that, but like, as soon as I rescued a dog, we gave up on the ability to, like...
Yeah, I know. And you have kids or you get married and you have a partner to consider or whatever that sort of scenario is, because I think about it too. It's like I've led a very independent life because I've needed to follow opportunities. And it's very difficult to drag another person along when they also have things they want to do and things they want to accomplish, right? And so it's a very bizarre life that I've led compared to other people, but it's also like, but I made those choices, so I'm okay with that.
In a way, that's been kind of the blessing of the fact that everybody started Zoom classes, because I think for so many people I've talked to who are either already parents or getting into this kind of post-career, whatever, it does open up the field to actually learn from people who really know what they're doing, even though you can't necessarily take a month off or 3 months off or a year or whatever to go.
I think that's what I love about, because I've done lots and lots and lots of workshops. It's been kind of a big part of my practice from grad school on. And what I love about doing the Zoom classes is that it's way more equitable and affordable and accessible to people. And it's much better for me financially, strangely. Like, in that way that I'm not away from home, not worried about my animals, not making very little money, and not making anything in my studio. So it's like it's funny because I think a lot of people want to go back to in person, and I'm much more of like, I would rather keep it this way because I've had people from all over the world take classes from me now. Like, and it's like, it's not the 12 people that can afford to take 2 weeks off and spend $5,000. Like, I can't do that. It's just like, that's not my life. And so it's wonderful for those folks that can do that. But I have done my time there. It's also like they can have lots of other people come and do that thing, and I can do this. And it's also like my own space, my own schedule. I have a lot more control over my life, which feels really good. And I can set the rules. It's always nice to be able to set the rules, you know? It's like, okay.
Well, that connects back to something earlier that you said about, like, how badly do you want to make it work? And even the idea of being willing to get up for the early classes in ceramics and realizing, okay, there's something here because I'm willing to not hit snooze on the alarm.
Right.
I think that also connects with how badly do you want to make it work as far as setting up your life to make it work in terms of what are you willing to give up? What are you not willing to give up? And thinking about that before you dive in to say, like, okay, like, you know, do we want to take a 2-week vacation to another country every single year? Well, then maybe I have to keep the part-time job.
Right? That's like, it's like priorities. Like when I set up my first independent studio, like I started a studio in Sacramento, and I couldn't afford to have an apartment and rent the studio. So I moved into the studio. Like, I was like, okay, I want to figure out how to make this work. There was enough room for me to move in there. And that meant I showered with a hose and a bucket. That's what that meant for a year. Like, it's like, okay, well, I want this bad enough, because I think that's the thing. It's like, we start to take on debt. We start to do all sorts of stuff as we get older, and it limits our options and our possibilities that we don't, you just don't even realize that that's what it's doing. And so it is like a matter of priorities. And I think that's the thing too. It's like, it's okay to have different priorities. This life is not for everybody. But it's also, it's like I get teased that I live like a retired person sometimes because like I hustle when I have.
Did that only happen when you went from 2 cats to 3 cats, though?
Exactly.
I mean, did that?
Right? I know. But it's like I garden, and I mean, I've made my self-care very important. It's a big part of like being able to sustain my life for a period of time, to be able to work in the studio. It's like, I don't do 12 hours a day in the studio anymore. I don't do those types of things because my body can't handle it. It's not good for my mental well-being or physical well-being. And so those are things that I make sure that I take care of myself. And I think for a lot of folks that are doing in the middle of the hustle, they're like, how do you have time for that? And it's like, you make the time for it and make it a priority, or you never, ever do it. So it's like, you gotta figure out what's important to you. And just, I think that's the thing. It's like, especially when it's interesting because I think a lot of people want to be in like self-employed, but they don't necessarily understand how much work it is. Like how much the weight is on you. Like if you haven't packed or shipped or done, you're doing it until it's done. That's the reality of it. And that you don't get to take off at 5 if the things aren't done. Like you're the person that has to hold the bag. Like you're doing it. Right. So it's a really important part of that, that equation that takes time and experience to understand that if you're making the opportunities, you have to fulfill, you got to show up for them, right? You got to, and it's exhausting. It can be, it's just, it's hard.
I don't want to put our stories on anybody else, but I don't know anybody who hasn't hit the point of being like, yeah, this is exhausting. I mean, you're speaking all the truth into my life, because that's quite, in some ways, there was a number of reasons, of course, everything's not singular, but in some ways that was why Francesco and I moved. I mean, we could have stayed in Chicago. I did own my condo, so that's a very high place of privilege, but the cost of that mortgage, it was a condo, so we would have had to rent a separate studio for him to actually start his own business and us to start that studio, so you would have had to then rent that studio. The places in the city where you could afford to do that were like an hour commute every single day to get to. Yeah. And we could have made it work if the priority would have been to stay in the city of Chicago. Yeah. But our priority was to have space in our life, physically, mentally, whatever, just to be able to have breathing room, not to have to say yes to every single gig because you just need to make the next $100 to keep the lights on. Yeah. And it just became this very simple. I mean, I had lived in Chicago for 14 years, and over the course of like 6 months, it was like, okay, sell it, move, gone. Yeah. And it was just a very natural, and some people were like, oh, Is everything okay?
I think there is this thing where people stay in a space, they stay in an uncomfortable position. I mean, that's the funny thing is like, it may be uncomfortable to make the decision, but sometimes people will, like, I've listened to something recently and it was like, if like something is like maybe going wrong in their body, like something's aching or whatever, it takes people like up to 7 years talk to somebody about, like, people don't want to change, like it's very difficult, or like whatever, they're depressed, will take people years to make a choice to get better, right? So so I think that's the thing, it's like I jump in the deep end of the pool. I just jump in. I'll figure out how to do it, okay, but I have friends that like, because I'm not afraid to fail, because I've failed so many times, like even with starting that studio, the worst thing that was going to happen was it was going to fail. And it did fail, but it was like, I wanted to try. It was important, and it was invaluable to me to do that. And it also made me realize, I actually don't want this thing. Like, I don't want to manage these people. I don't want to do this thing. So it's easy to let go when you're like, okay, we're just closing down. Makes life easier. I'm going to try something else. But I think it's like, you have to be comfortable with failing and that not being stigmatized. And I think as artists, we're typically well equipped at failure, because if we fail a lot, you try and things don't work out. So we practice failure. And so I think it's really interesting, because I'm happy to jump in and try something. I have some friends that they just stay in their box, because stepping out of that box is really difficult or scary, and not so much when you're not worried about falling on your face, because you just get back up. It's fine.
Well, and also the word failure is always interesting to me, because like, how are we really defining it in terms of like, you still have your practice, you're still self-employed, which was the primary driver of decisions perhaps. And you know what I mean? It's not like you're not homeless. You're not, working for the man, like you're like,
well, it's funny, because I read this book, and I feel like Tim Ferriss is more controversial now than he used to be, because he's like kind of a weird dude. But anyways, he did a book a long time ago. I think one of his first one was like the 4-hour work week or something like that.
Yep.
There was a phrase in there that stuck with me, and it was that kind of that idea that if that people don't try things because they're afraid of failure, right? And he's like, and if you just sort of take, what's the worst thing that can happen if you try this thing and fail? And that's always helped, because it's like, okay, I'm not going to be homeless. I have a support system. I can always, so it's like, trying this isn't going to cost me everything, right? That's what I think what we think is that if we take a step out on the limb, that it's going to cost us everything. And it's like, no. I mean, there are some choices that maybe do cost us everything, but that's probably another conversation.
Different podcast. Different podcast.
Exactly. Heavens. But that's the thing. It's like, and that for me has really helped, because I kind of check in with my fear. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Are you afraid? What's happening? You have to be in touch and find your self-confidence to say, I know I'm capable of doing this, or at least trying this. I have resources and I can do it. That sort of like mindset really helped me kind of early on when I was trying to figure out how to build a career and make choices. Because sometimes in the ceramics field, you're asked to go do things that you don't have the resources to do, like go do residencies where you don't have money to support yourself, or you're moving across the country, or you're like all this crazy stuff that you just don't have resources for. So it's sometimes like, even when I went to the Bray as a resident, as a long-term resident, because I had gone there as a summer resident, then went and tried to figure out how to live for a year, and was struggling. It was like really hard. I couldn't find I was teaching like 3 different adjunct jobs. It was just like a nightmare. And was offered a spot at the Bray for 2 years, and I was like, okay, and like the person that called me, like woke me up, and I was like, okay, hello, and then they offered me the spot, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to call you back. And so then I just sat on the bed, and I was like, because it was shifting gears, because I was like applying for all these jobs and just trying to figure that out. And then I was like, okay, what will happen if you go to Montana? And I was like, okay, nothing bad will happen if you go do this thing for 2 years. And so it was like, and then I just called back. I was like, okay, I'll do it. But I kind of had to I have to stop and think for a second, and walk myself through that process, because it was like shifting gears to another, I'm changing path in a way, and believing more in myself than asking people to hire me. I think that was for me, and that was in a weird way, a turning point towards, because I had applied to the Bray with mostly like, I need to figure out how to be self-sustaining. I need to figure out how to be a business, and having that subsidized at the Bray was really helpful for me because it was 2 years of studio, subsidized pay and all sorts of stuff that really enabled me to start to build kind of a viable financial situation for myself. So
yeah. I was just going to ask, just for people who don't know, because I like to not make assumptions.
Yeah.
And I will ask the stupid questions so nobody has to. But for anybody who's never heard of the Bray, let's just spell out what that scenario looks like.
It's not a stupid question because it's a very small little institution, really. But in the ceramic world, we do lots of residency programs. Yeah. And so Archie Bray is a residency program specifically for ceramic artists, unlike Penland or other places that have multitude of crafts. The Bray is primarily focused on ceramic artists, and that's functional and sculptural. They have a 10-person long-term residency, and then a 10-person summer residency, and then they have visiting artists that come throughout the year for they have visiting artist studios and stuff like that. So, and it's here in Helena, Montana.
And that's how is that what brought you to Montana then?
That's what brought me to Montana in the first place, and then I left Montana. I was not planning to move here, but a lot of my resident group ended up settling here. And so I have a collection of 5 or 6 really great friends. And one of the things for me that's always been difficult about having this career is that you're often just one ceramic person dropped wherever, right? You're just there. And so, and as a independently employed person, you're always freaking working and you don't have time to go out and it's very difficult to make new friends anyways, but it's also difficult when you're working all the time or traveling. I did a lot of traveling, so it makes it really hard. And so I moved back here 2.5 years ago now, maybe, and to be closer to friends, basically. And so it's been great. Yeah.
This is actually the attraction to me with ceramics compared to photography and wedding industry, because it seems to me like everyone lives so geographically removed, if you will, because especially your wood firing community and stuff like that, you can't live in an urban city and be a wood fire. Are you kidding me? That's just not happening. And what's fascinating though is the first 11 years of my entrepreneurial experience was all about being in the place with the people, to be seen, see and be seen, and, stay top of mind and network. But what I love about ceramics is you can build that network in a way that isn't necessarily hinged upon, did you show up to the mixer on Tuesday to make sure that everybody remembers you? I love that.
Well, I think that's also changed with the internet and the way that we do things. Because the other thing too is I'm not, my market and the people that I make money off of or my revenue is not my fellow ceramic artists typically. It's other people, so it's I have a market of folks. So it is, and for me, with all the moving around that I did, it was really important. I just started building that online immediately because I was always moving. So I was that's my home base and that's where I can be. And so what is nice, I think the move to Montana, it was a big move because by that time I had so much equipment. I had to hire movers to help me move stuff. I can do this from anywhere actually. And that thing is for me, I also sort of geared my making practice to plug in a kiln. That's what I wanted to do. I just want to plug in a kiln and make it a little bit easier on myself.
Call an electrician, move in, and we're good.
Exactly. Yeah, because I didn't want to haul wood. I'm so tired of hauling wood and doing all that stuff. I did do that early on, but it was okay, this is not something I want to do forever. So.
It was genuinely, real talk, it was part of one of the deciding making factors for us to buy a house when we moved, was because we were just going to rent, and then we were okay, so here's how this conversation is going to play out. You walk up to a landlord and say, we have a 75-pound rescue pit mix, and we also need 220 voltage to plug in a kiln. That's cool, right? We're good?
You're good? I know.
I was what house are we going to find?
I know. It's insanity.
Joking?
Yeah, no.
So tell me a little bit about what does keep the lights on. You mentioned selling online, and I'm also fascinated because I am very fascinated to know how the online sales become sustainable when you start factoring in things not only the cost of shipping, but the amount of time to ship your goods and all of that kind of maintenance. So how do all these revenue streams kind of balance out?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about, so I have very few galleries that I have work at, because I don't get reimbursed for any of that shipping. It's like I make half the amount of money on the pots and I am out shipping. So it's actually not a good revenue stream to have work in galleries for me anyways. Every once in a while, like if I'm also like right now I'm working on a new book. So I'm like, sure, take some work, sell it. I'm not going to worry about hustling that work out in the world. I have really devoted a lot of time to building an online market, and the reality of like having a mailing list of supportive people. Like I don't have an enormous mailing list, but I have enough of a mailing list that people collect my work and support me in these ways. And so I think so part of it is I charge for shipping on my website. It's not free. I would say I get really close to breaking even on the shipping as far as materials and actual shipping costs. And I have all that mechanized through like my Squarespace account that goes through ShipStation. And it's part of it's like, but in the beginning, when I was first doing it, all I had to do was I'm like, okay, I just have to figure out how to sell one mug a month because it pays for everything. So that's how I started. It's like one mug. I just got to sell one, so, and now over 10 years of having inventory always online, figuring out how to do mailing lists and message people, building that mailing list. I built that mailing list often through workshops, in-person workshops a lot. And so then this last few years, I'd say COVID year, a large part of my income came from online teaching and then selling pots. And that's the thing is I think a lot of people, when they think you tell them you're a potter or a ceramic artist, whatever terminology you use, all they do is imagine that you sit and make pots all day long. That's what and the reality is I make pots a couple days a month. They get glazed in a couple days, they get fired, then I sandblast, and I have my own process. So I maybe spend about a week, a month making pots. The rest is all the other commitments. It's emails, it's packing pots, it's just doing things like this. Like whatever it is I'm doing, it's all other stuff. The easiest thing in the world is to make. It's the other stuff that you have to figure out how to incorporate. And for me, I'm a big goal setter. I like to set goals because it helps me figure out how to do it. And the truth is if I show up to the studio, it's easier to make pots than it is to figure out how to make a mailing list and send, you feel like so much vulnerable. So part of it is I would give myself like, okay, you're going to do 2 hours of computer work before you go to the studio. So I had to do those things because I always want to go to the studio, right? So that was the easy part. So, and I'm finding as I've gotten older that I need more momentum. Like I need time to sort of dig into things. And so it's been nice not to have to travel to earn income because that time away, there's also recovery time, prep time. It ends up being a big chunk of time that is lost revenue, lost work time. So I balance it out. And that's the thing too. I have a sort of set time. Like I typically show up at the studio around 10 or 11, depending on my day or whatever I'm doing. And, I'm usually done by 5, but it's like, sometimes it's just organizing. Sometimes it's, it's really varied, and sometimes making lists and things. Like right now, I'm not making a ton of stuff. I'm trying to make a day or two a week where I go in and make some stuff for a few hours, but I'm really focusing on my book, and the writing takes a lot of momentum. I need to every day I sit and I type because it's not my comfortable space. So, and then I also need research and development time for that because they're new projects and different things I'm working on. So I need a lot of headspace for that. And so it's like everything has to turn off, and I can't because everything else is like, oh, I could just do that instead. That's easier than this moment, right? So I'm like, okay.
Bing, notification. Yeah. Yep. I need to do a whole podcast episode on, I don't know if you've read the book Traction. It's not a book that really applies to the maker's world or even to the businesses in the capacity that you and I have them, because it's more about growing a team and like scaling something. But friends of mine told me particularly about this concept that has changed my world and implemented it. And it's much like what you're talking about, but they put the words to it that are focus, flow, and flex time. And it's basically like you're committing the same times on your calendar to where focus is the hard work, the stuff that takes a lot of brain space that maybe doesn't feel urgent, but you have to get done in order to achieve the goal that you actually want to achieve. So like writing a book, for example, that I'm guessing that your due date for that is down the road, so it doesn't feel urgent. But if you don't set a time,
if
like
you're not
every day
addressing it every day, you're screwed. Like that's
exactly. Whereas like making for you would be like flow space, where it's the stuff you have to do every single day or on a repeat, or, you know, for somebody it's answering emails, it's the customer service. It's like, you need to get that done, but you're going to get it done that day, regardless of the time of day, even if you're in like that afternoon, like caffeine is worn out and you need another cup of tea situation. And then flex is like, is flexible, you know, you do whatever, but that's, I need to just do a whole episode to like dig into those things, because that's what I'm hearing as you're talking about, of like, okay, do the hard stuff first, and then you basically get the reward with what you want to do. And I don't know how many people I've told, and college, you know, kids coming out of undergrad and things who like want to get into photography and think they want to start their own business. They say, cool. What do you want to spend the majority of your time doing? And they're like, well, taking pictures. I'm like, great, go work for somebody else. Like you need to then go be employed by a studio, work for them. You will literally get to pick up the camera whenever you want, and that's that. Because otherwise,
you're doing the hard work. And I think that's the thing. It's so interesting of like, and I've always just tried to be really honest about like the idea that it's not the daydream. Like I love the daydream. It's part of maybe why I got into it. In the beginning, it kind of is the daydream. You just fall in love. You're falling in love with this thing, and you're doing it all the time. But it's also, the drawbacks are not a 9 to 5. That's for damn sure. Like the reality is like the work is work that I can do. I can teach myself. I can hire somebody to do if I need help. Like whatever that sort of thing is, it's very. The drawback is minimal compared to maybe the cost of working for someone else in another capacity that I see some friends do. You know, you're just like, that sounds unpleasant. Whatever that is, you know, just like, oh, okay.
I have the problem with like my obsession with efficiency is just like, why, if I get all my work done on time and it's done within whatever set due date somebody would give me, why can't I leave and go grocery shopping at 1:30 in the afternoon when it's empty? Instead of having to sit still and wait until 5 or 5:30 when it's going to take me 3 times as long because the line is going to be out the door.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's just a thing. And that's the thing. That's why I think people think I live like this retired life, because I can go grocery shopping at 1:30 because I manage my time how I want to manage it, right? So it's like, and because it's like, you're right, like the things that need to get done because I get them done when it's the time to get them done. But it's like the other stuff that I can save my time and have different energy for. I think that's it. It's like, I want because it's like that flex stuff, or like the things that packing pots, it doesn't require a lot of brain energy. It's just doing a thing. It's like, so I can do that tired, but I need that. I want that minute, like, because I think that's the other thing too. Is like when I think about being like self-employed and a creative in that way, you don't want to get caught up in a slog. You don't want to just like grind. You want like, it's like COVID was an interesting time for me because I was able to sort of dive into the teaching, and it was really productive in well spent energy. Like I was able to invest in people, share with people, help them during this time. It was a very difficult time for me to be creative because I just felt a lot of stress, and like I didn't have that free space in my brain, but I still needed like an outlet. So like I started sewing. So like I sewed this, like I did, because it was like I'm just putting pieces together and playing with fabric. Like it was something creative for me to do that didn't require me to initiate like all that imagination. Like it was just like I'm following a thing, and that's comforting to me, but I'm still making something with my hands, which is important to myself, you know. But it is like, that's why I think it's sometimes really good to diversify not only your revenue tracks, but maybe your interests, because those things can turn into revenue streams, but they also help keep your brain balanced and your body balanced. Like, I mean, I think that's one of the things I struggle with the writing, is that it's a lot of sitting and typing, and that's harder on my body really to sit and type all day. So it's like, I have to do, okay, you got a couple hour chunk that you have to do, and then you can go out and do a walk or do whatever you need to do. So I think there's a lot of that where you're saying like every day I have to do a little bit, otherwise I'm screwed. But it's also like, it's a much more healthy way to live than the cram way that we maybe were learned in school, like where you're just like, okay, I'm just going to study for this test for 10 hours, right? Like that's really unhealthy behavior, but, geez.
Right. And I think that's been one of the most difficult things for me is the recognition of how much space fostering that creative life really takes. And that because I am such a checklist, systems, efficiency person, that taking up space to just go for a walk and think for a while, to me, doesn't feel like I'm doing anything, quote unquote. Right? I'm using like air quotes that nobody can see. But
I know we're both I'm gesturing a lot. I was like, wow, I'm really waving it for the
they're missing out on so much. But I'm never going to switch this to video. Somebody asked me once, like, oh, why don't you do video on YouTube in tandem with the podcast? I was like, no. Then we all have to like shower and put on makeup before these phone calls. I promised everyone I invited here that like, yes, we'll see each other so we can like have the body language, but no. Yeah. Anyway, what's so hard for me in our culture and maybe just like the intense work ethic that I grew up with, which served me in many ways, which is is a positive thing up until a point. But when you've got a family of farmers, you still have to do chores on Christmas. That never stops. And so that feeling of being out in nature and going for a walk and just like sitting still or reading or doing something that's completely unattached to whatever's on that to-do list is so hard to carve out that space and be like, I'm being a good steward of my time by doing this, because it feels so luxurious, privileged, all of the things, while also crucial to our health.
I think that's the funny thing is I hit a point like, I guess, it's probably 4 or 5 years now. It's funny how time just disappears. You just like, that was actually a while ago. But I had a period.
Also, 2020 doesn't count.
No, 2020 doesn't count, or it was the longest year in the world, whatever the thing is. But it is, I hit a point for myself where, and I don't know if maybe, because I don't know much of your story with your profession, but the way that I was workshopping a lot. In 1 year, I had done like over 30 workshops. So that's either weekends away or week-longs, and I hated my life. And in theory, I was successful. People wanted to be me. I was the envy of people, and I understood that, but I wanted to quit. I was like, I don't want to fucking do this anymore. It's exhausting. I'm broke. Nothing was working, and I had put on a lot of weight. I was unhappy, and I was like, okay. And the reality is, like, I had a whole nother year planned exactly the same. And I'm like, fuck, what do I do? What do I do? And what I realized was like, okay, you're going to commit your time to your health. That's what you're going to do. You're going to get up at 6:30 and be at the gym at 7 every fucking day. You're going to quit going to the studio, or you get home by 9 o'clock. That's the craziness of the hours of like, okay, 9 o'clock was my, like, you got to get home
early.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, Jesus. But it was like, and that for me was this big shift because I pulled back. I wasn't less productive. I was more efficient. Like I was able to start to understand that like working tired it made me careless or make mistakes, whatever the situation was. And I think and I tend to do, because my birthday's in January too, so I do a lot of the goal setting for my business, goal setting for myself at that time. And so I had a whole year of that where I still did the slog, I still did all the workshops and stuff, but I started to prioritize. I was like, okay, I need to charge more money for workshops. I need to do that. Like, I need to figure out how to make this better. I also need to, and that commitment to the fact that you are going to go exercise every day. You are going to do like that sort of thing. It helped me realize the next year when I went to make commitments to myself, I was like, wow, I'm not going to change any of those commitments. Like they're working for me. Right. And I think that's what's interesting is that setting up those systems help you kind of like, because I also it's what's interesting too for me as a ceramic artist, like I don't necessarily, because I've heard someone to talk about like a writer say they need time to be bored so their brain will kind of spin and daydream, like they'll find that. For me, the reality is like I need to have long enough in the studio making things so that ideas will happen. But I need to be making, like I need my hands doing something, right? And so I can combine that productivity part of myself with that creative part of myself after a bit of momentum and time. But I think that's the interesting thing is that if I'm at the studio and I'm having this hard time, it's kind of like I really try. I'm like, you need to get outside. You need to go take a walk, or you need to do this thing because you're not making any progress here. Like, because that's what I do now. Now it's like this more like kind of like a teenage self shows up and is just like, no, I'm not going to do that thing. It's just like gets all like, I'm just, and so it's like, you need to do something else. So part of me is just really, has turned the corner on that for myself of like understanding that, because I think part of me thought, and I don't know if you felt this with your work ethic, it's that I'm not suffering, that I must not be successful or trying hard enough, right? That's kind of like, that's that horrible feeling of like, I'm letting myself down, other people, I'm letting other, like whatever that is. And it's like, because I think what is interesting is, and sometimes I don't think about it much anymore, but I would do it all, like everything. And then because that cost me so much, it hurt me so much, like it just nearly destroyed me, that I realized like, oh, I only have to give this much and everyone's happy. Like, that's interesting, like it's so crazy to realize like, okay, this is, because it's like, sometimes it's that overachiever. For me, I'm an oldest child, like whatever that thing is, like it's too much. Really, it's actually too much and you need to pump the brakes and calm down. But it's a really difficult habit to break because we tell some crazy story to ourselves about that behavior or our failings or whatever it is. And so I've really learned to be more kind to myself and generous with that kind of mindset of like my mom is visiting me right now. It's like, well, I should be writing, but it's like, I got a couple hours in, I'm good. I got pages turned in, things are good. And it's like, I haven't seen my mom in 2 years because of COVID. So like, I deserve time to spend with, it's like, and because I think it's also like right now with the COVID life, the world feels like it's rushing at me. Anyways, I feel it's like everybody's running so fast. And I'm like, Jesus.
Everybody was talking such a big game about how, oh, wow, how nice. We're finally having family dinners, or like, it's so nice to not be go, 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 go. And then as soon as it opened again, it was like,
I know.
And I was like, I'm sorry. Did we all forget what?
I know. Like, I didn't want to do that thing. And so, so I think that's what
I thought we were going to like ease back into it, but no, we just went 0 to 200. Okay.
I know.
Cool.
I know. So, so I'm feeling a little bit of that weird push and pull of like not quite knowing what speed I want to be going yet. And, it's okay. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's all okay. So.
Well, and I think for me, the funny thing about being self-employed is that we've put all that pressure on ourselves.
Yeah.
If I've created the environment where everyone expects me to respond to their email within 2 hours, I created that environment.
We've made the rules, right? In theory, we made the rules. So Jesus.
So like, if you make the expectation, and also responding to an email within 48 hours still isn't that long. It's 2 days. Like that should be fine. That should be amply quick. And yet somehow, whether you're working with clients or whatever it is, like the environments that have been created and the expectations, more often than not, we've put on ourselves. And so we can change them, but you just have to be, then you have to be diligent about it.
There will be some consequence about it. There possibly, because everybody's got their own crazy. Like, it's just, so I think because I'll feel that too, where I'm like, you get a text and you're like, why haven't they responded? And you're just like, they could be doing something. Like, that's the reality. Because I do things like Jesus, So it's just like a thing. And like, I remember one time, and it was like so long ago in high school, one of my teachers, way before cell phones, he had people over for dinner and the phone rang and they're like, aren't you going to get the phone? He's like, no. He's like, it's a convenience. It's not convenient to answer it right now. Yes. And that's the thing. It's like, the reality is like, okay, this is a convenience. It's interesting now how much we have to unplug everything. Like, I have to unplug the phone. I have to take off my watch. I have to, like, everything is telling me busy, do things. And it's like, stop. I have to unplug. Even like my watch, I wear and have like fitness folks on there. And like the other day, and like they've set up these insane challenges for me. And I'm just like, I'm just taking you off today.
Clear all.
And I had all this stress about like, I'm not going to get my badge. I'm not going to close the brand. I'm just like, oh God. And I'm just like, The phone is not the boss of you. The watch is not in charge. Like, Jesus.
I forgot I had like taken mine off because we were doing some work, like lots of sawdust and things, and it was just like rubbing and annoying. So I took it off, and I forgot to put it back on before I went and worked out, and I was like, it doesn't even go!
It's so, and I'm like,
so
I
upset.
love it, but it's so like annoying that is like, we're just such a dog waiting for a bone. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, that's the little badge that makes me so happy.
And I couldn't close my rings. Even it's like, you still did work out. You did the thing.
You
The whole point.
You did the thing, but you didn't get credit.
Exactly.
I want credit for the thing.
I can't tell.
I know.
Oh, gosh.
It's insane.
I don't even know how to connect to that, too.
I know. I think it's that whole thing of like how I think we were talking about creativity and like how do we, there is some part of that disconnect, overachiever, mayhem, whatever, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and for me, you were talking about where that kind of comes from on my side of things. It's creepy how much it's connected to like, is the sun out? Like, so in the winter, I can set boundaries in much shorter work hours because when the sun sets at 4, I feel like my day is done and it's okay to go sit on the couch. Whereas in the summer, I realize, it's 8:30 and I'm still at my computer. I should go eat dinner. I'm sure some specialist somewhere has something to say about the universe and the cycles of the world and our connection with nature, which is all great, except for the fact that you shouldn't be at your computer for 12 hours.
Yes, exactly. No, and that's the same thing here in Montana. It's like when I first moved here, I was like, it's probably time for dinner. And I'd be like, it's 10 o'clock. I need to eat dinner. I was like, gee, because it's like the sun is still out. And you're just like, what the hell is happening?
Yep.
So, I'm with you. But it is like, I do feel like sometimes, where do you live?
We are now in Milwaukee instead of Chicago, so we're a little further north.
Cool. And I think part of it is like for me, winters here are long and cold, and there is something in like my family lives in Portland, Oregon, so there's something about the summers that you enjoy the summer because you have to endure the winters. So there is less of the need to be inside and more need to be outside, which is sometimes hard when you have to sit and write or do things. You're just like, damn it, okay.
It's the worst. Like, I'm very lucky to work with couples on the wedding. Like, most people expect weddings to be like Bridezillas, whatever. And spoiler alert, you put out what you get. So if you put out the right branding, you get the right people.
Right. Yeah.
On a myriad of levels in life. And so, like, I work with awesome people, but to have your busiest time of year be... If I lived in San Diego, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It's 70 and sunny all year round. Right. I could take lovely beach days in February or whatever, and it would be fine. But in the Midwest, you live for those 4 months out of the year.
Yeah, I know.
And that's when it's the absolute insanity of work. And it's just like, Like,
I know,
last summer actually was kind of nice.
I know. Isn't it funny? I know. That's the thing, too. Of like, all my workshops are typically in the summer, so then I'm never home in the summer. And I'm like, I've been able to have a CSA, and this year, like, I have a vegetable and a flower CSA, because I can have cut flowers. But all of a sudden, I'm just like, oh, life is so good when I don't have to be away.
I love it. Well, I think that we've already answered this question, but just in case people have lost,
lost the train of thought.
Whatever. What if, for those people who are coming to you that are just trying to get started, and maybe it's not necessarily the kids coming out of undergrad, but the person in that middle of life career change or trying to balance this, that, and the other, is there something that comes top of mind for you that you're like, this is what I wish you would know? This is what... Not that either of us do anything different, but...
I know. I think, what's funny is when I do give people advice or they ask, I think one of it is, I think we've said it in a way, of like, know what your priorities are. If you want to make money from something, do the math. Figure out the math of a thing, that's really important. Because clay is also not cheap to do. Like, it's not, it's an investment it's like everything's sort of shifting and changing, but it's studio fees or it's investing in your own home studio. Like, that's a lot of investment for something that is very difficult to make a living from. Because I think I meet a lot of people that they think clay will be their, like, they'll make extra money doing it. And to me, I'm always like, oh, it's so hard to make money. It's just so hard to make money doing it. But I think the thing is, it's like start slow and steady and just be true. To me, it's always like be true to what interests you and what you make. And it behooves people to be able, it's like, learn how to build a website, learn how to do, it's like learn how to do all the, I think people are better at it now, but it's like, you have to be able to do that for yourself, to be flexible and agile in the market that's changing. And it's kind of like you said earlier, like, what is it that you want to do with your time? If you just want to make pots, it's a different thing. It's like figure out something else that pays for that hobby, maybe, because I think there's always smarter ways to make money than what that's the bummer. It's like there are just smarter ways to make money.
Real estate, actually, currently, apparently.
I know. I remember one time when I was at the Bray, they were like trying to get money from this insanely wealthy person, and so they brought us out to their house for a party as like show and tell kind of thing. I don't know what that. Anyways, I was just like, what does this guy do? Because Jesus, we're in the wrong business. Like, this is just the side house. Like, it's not even the big house. Like, what the hell? Like, oh my God. So yeah, I think I wish like I had, to me, what I have like I think part of it is like my educator self. I meet a lot of people that do that I'm like kind of in a way helping connect them to their creativity again. Mm-hmm. And I think there's this big push right now, or at least maybe the last 10 years, that you have to make your hobby make money. And I think it doesn't allow for creative growth and creative confidence and artistry really to emerge. And so you don't have to make a cup that you have to sell. Like you can just make cups and enjoy that process. I think that the figuring out how to make money, it can really just drain the life out of the joy that you had for that thing. So like, because what's funny is like doing the thing that you love, which is kind of what I was raised to believe was a thing. You have to grapple with the fact that it's also just a job. It's a job. Like, at this point, it's hard for me to change careers because I know how to do this thing now. And I've made it figure out how to work. So moving to another industry might work for me, but I kind of like what I've carved out for myself. But it took 10 years, 11 years of really moving around the country, having very different priorities than other folks my age. Like, it's just because that's what I wanted more than anything else, really. Like, I didn't have kids. Like, that's the other thing too, is if you look at men and women and the differences there too, it's like it's really hard to have kids and have this full-time thing if you don't have a partner. Or there's a lot of, when I was in grad school, all the men had wives and the women did not have spouses. Like there's just a reality to some of the sexism that exists in our industry, like the industries of really America. We have a lot of problems with, like, I don't think it's unique to ceramics, but it's like you sometimes have to check your passion. Like, okay, what am I passionate about? What do I want to do? Is that worth maybe destroying it? Like, that's because that's what money does. Money makes it harder to really love a thing, Because like early on, I don't know, we were talking about that idea of like, what do we have to set boundaries around? I don't want to talk about glazing, or I don't want to. There's also this community aspect of ceramics too that can be very invasive, and that you can, if you're successful, you can just become a commodity in some fashion, and that can, you have to have a business persona to understand that versus an artistic persona that fledgling artist is not going to have enough of a thick skin yet to deal with. So I think there's a lot to think about, that it's not easy to do, and maybe nurture your creative self long enough to look at it in a little bit more objective way. It's like, protect yourself a little bit, understand how you want to spend your energy and time. And to me, it's funny. I think it's worth it for my life, but it's also, it's my life. I made my decisions. I've made my choices. So I'm not, I don't regret them because I have a lovely life. Yeah, but it is interesting. It's I find it really hard to give advice to people in any kind of stage, because it's you just have to make choices, and those choices, they're going to take you down the path that you're going to take. If I knew the answers, I would have done it that way. Maybe, maybe I would have done it that way. I don't know.
You would have that house.
Exactly. I would have that house. I would understand.
Well, I do think it's a really good point that's worth also kind of repeating in whatever phrase you want to use, in terms of, it's ironic that two self-employed people, like, I can hear people saying, like, oh, sure, that's all fine and well for you two to say because you're doing the thing. But it is true that not all passions are built to be businesses. It doesn't always work out that way. And that doesn't mean that you can't find a job that can give some security to life that also gives you enough freedom and flexibility to do the passion. I think where the rub comes for people is when it's such a strict regimented schedule. You know, you're like, okay, I have to work 9 to 5 every single day, Monday through Friday. I have no flexibility. I'm there extra hours. I can't do anything. Whereas if, you know, there's people I hear from who have been in a position long enough where it's like, well, I work 4 days a week, and one of those days I work from home, and it gives me more flexibility. Or like, actually, Ryan from RD Ceramics was talking about, like, he's worked from home for almost the entirety of his career, and then he has a studio in his house, and so he can, in the morning as he's making tea, go down and wrap pots or unwrap pots and check moisture consistency, and then log a few hours on the computer, and then go down and attach some handles and, you know, whatever.
Well, and I think, like, kind of what you're saying, like, every passion doesn't need to be a profession. It's also, every person isn't built to be self-employed. That's another part of that equation, right? Of, like, taking that on is also hard. And it does, that's the thing. It's like, you have to have a different kind of constitution sometimes to be able to do it. And, and not everybody's built that way. And it's important to, and that's the thing, is, like, I think, like, speak about failures earlier, like, you know, because I've had students or folks, like interns, folks that have come to work with me, and it's not, they just don't quite like, they're not putting in the work or the energy, you know, and I have no judgment about that. I'm like, you know, you got to do what you want to do. Me at your stage, this is what I was doing, right? Like, I would list off the things. So, and I was like, to me, I'm like, this is a reflection of what you want. So look at that. Like, you don't have to be me. You don't have to want to do all these things. But let's be honest, it's also not a failure to change your mind. Like, if it's really not what you want to, like, make hard, like, 'cause I also don't like the word, like, I hate the word sacrifice. I think we make hard choices. We either we want this thing or we don't want that thing, right? We make these choices that they are our choice. Making a different choice isn't a failure. You don't actually want it. Like, if you wanted it, you would make different choices. And that's okay. Like, I think that's the thing too, is, like, I think especially for younger folks who dive in and are falling in love with a thing, and then the reality is, like, you know, they find a mate or they have kids or other things become priorities. Like, it's okay for those things to become priorities. It's what you're building
especially
your whole
if
life.
they're children. Please make those priorities.
Exactly.
Just for their, you know,
that whole thing. Or if it's adopting now, it's like you're building your whole life. And like I said earlier, I think it's important to have a very rich life, experience-wise, not money-wise. And so build the life that you want. You got this one. That's it. Like, just build this one and make those choices that are going to bring you joy and your family joy and the folks around you joy. Like, make those choices, because if something only brings you heartache, it's like, because that's the thing. It's like, trying to sell pots can bring a lot of people heartache. Like, it's disappointing. You know, people, it's like, you just don't quite understand sometimes how disappointing. And it's like, I love, like, Arthur Gonzalez, who's a sculptor out in California. He like made a illustration book where he saved all of his rejection letters, and then, like, he drew on them. But it's like, he has a 400-page book of rejection letters, right? That's the reality. It's like, you have to be a little bit of a glutton for punishment in some way, you know, like, it's just like, good God. So I think it's really interesting, because it is, having a career as a maker or artist or creative person, it isn't as straightforward. And it's also, I think, really linked to you emotionally, versus having that job that you show up to that the building could burn down and you'd be like, damn, I got to get another job. You know, whatever that is, it's just like, there's not this emotional connection to it. Whereas, like, I've had struggles in my past where I thought maybe it's time to quit doing this. And then it's like, it's an identity issue where I'm like, okay, well, who am I if I'm not a ceramic artist? Like, and so I think there's a way to understand that, okay, this can be a little bit separate from my identity as a human, but it's also, that's the job that I've chosen that is part of my identity. So there's a balance there to find and understand. I think that's really important about just that life journey, like not even career or whatever it is. It's just your whole life journey of like making those choices that hopefully bring you satisfaction and joy and all of those good things, you know.
Hey, you guys. So, technology hates me and cut off the actual ending of my chat with Sunshine, but it was obviously too good to re-record all of those amazing conversations and topics we just discussed. And frankly, it kind of ended in the perfect spot, right? As you heard the two of us discuss, and it has been so common in conversations with other makers on the podcast here, the life of the self-employed is not for the faint of heart. While incredibly rewarding, it can also be incredibly challenging. So how badly do you want it? What do you want your life to actually look like? As a mentor and a coach of mine once pointed out, most people do this backwards. They invest all their time and resources into building a business and think, once the business is in a certain point of growth or success, whatever it is, then they will start having the life that they want. When really, that's backwards. Decide what you want your life to be like first, and build the work, employment, side hustle, or maybe your own business around that life. Trust me, I've tried it the other way, and it doesn't work. I can promise you. All of this reminds me a bit of what I shared back on episode 107, discussing thoughts on making decisions and the framework I laid out in our free PDF guide, The Savvy Owner's Quick Guide to Smart Decisions. You can still snag that for free at makers-playbook.com/guardrails. Whether you're side hustling or full-time, whether you've started selling your work online, or simply listening to these conversations dreaming of the day that you might start selling your pieces, snag this free PDF either way because it's going to help guide all of those reoccurring questions that keep popping up. Again, you can grab that at www.makers-playbook.com/guardrails. All right, my friends, until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.